Hello, everyone. Good morning and good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, whatever your time zone. Welcome. This is Digital Transformation Talk, and I am your host, Kevin Crane. Welcome to the show. In the excitement about the future of work, it can be easy to forget about those actually doing the work, people, and how change will affect them. Upskilling and productivity enhancing tools are a big part of digital transformation, but it can be easy to focus exclusively on the technologies and forget that people are where innovation happens. And if people feel alienated by the technology or the change process itself, our transformation efforts will fail. So, how can digital transformation leaders avoid alienating employees and keep them involved and engaged during the transition? Well, that's what we'll be discussing today with a great panel of guests, ways to prepare your workforce for upcoming productivity innovations. And preparing your workforce is crucial to ensure that your organization is effective and remains competitive and efficient. This takes continuous learning and development and investment in ongoing training programs to keep employees updated on the latest technologies and the tools relevant to transforming your organization and supporting process innovation. And more than the technologies, it takes an overall culture of innovation that encourages creativity, supports freely sharing and collaborating, and rewards innovative thinking. It's really kind of a new approach to teams and indeed how we work together, cross functional teams, virtual teams that are digitally literate and comfortable using new technologies. So it's about the people, no doubt, but technology will certainly drive this cultural shift. Organizations are investing heavily in automation and AI, yet it is critically important to train employees to work alongside these automated systems and AI, emphasizing the human skills that complement these technologies. So, by taking a proactive approach to workforce development, you can position your organization to thrive in the face of productivity innovations. But how do you do it? That's what we'll be discussing today with a great panel of guests. But before I introduce our guests, I do want to say that we want to hear from you too. Excuse me. I'd like to encourage everyone attending today to participate. So please join in with your comments in the chat section. And if you have a question along the way, jump on in. I will attempt to get some of your questions into the flow of the show, and we'll have a few minutes also at the end for your questions. So let's get to our panel today, starting with Sunil Patil. Sunil, are you with us?
Hi,
Sunil
Kevin. Good
Patil,
afternoon.
welcome
I'm
aboard,
here.
Sunil. Hello. Sunil is director of the Program Management Office for the International Markets at MasterCard. Sunil, where are you calling in from?
I'm dialing in from Pune, India, Kevin.
All the way across the world. Well, welcome aboard. It's great to have you with us. Thank you so much, Sunil. Also joining us is Morgan Reed. Morgan, are you with us? Hello, Morgan.
I am indeed.
Morgan Reed is Chief Information Officer at Birdiescope. Welcome, Morgan. Where are you calling in from?
I'm in Phoenix, Arizona.
Phoenix, Arizona, a place I know well. Awesome. Thank you for joining us. And also joining us today is Brian Phillips. Brian, are you with us?
I am. Thank you,
There you
Kevin.
are. Hello, Brian. Brian is Senior Manager of Pre-Sales Consulting at TELUS International. So Sunil, Morgan, and Brian, welcome aboard, gentlemen. Thank you for spending some time with me today. To get us started, I'd like to draw our attention to an article published recently by Forbes. It's titled Keeping Frontline Workers at the Forefront of Innovation. And it talks about how over the last 2 decades, the world of work has experienced a massive acceleration in productivity thanks to digital collaboration tools like Slack, Microsoft 365, and others. This drive toward increasing workplace productivity has led to $55 billion in market value creation and has revolutionized really everything that we do at work. Nearly 70% of the US workforce are frontline workers. Businesses with highly engaged workers have 26% higher revenue per employee. So the article provides a number of strategies to help. Training and empowerment are key, but what are your thoughts and recommendations, gentlemen? How can businesses keep the front line at the front of innovation? Sunil, I'd like to start with you if I could. What are your thoughts on the article?
Absolutely, Kevin. I think while I was reading through the article, I was kind of looking at certain very key insights that it was giving to all of us as readers. The first of which was, by default, when we look at technology innovations, the typical knowledge workers come to our mind, those people who are already adept at using technology to some degree. But I think the article gives us a rude shock, pretty necessary, I would say, that 70% of the overall workforce, as it was mentioned in the article, belongs to the frontline workers who may or may not be as technologically adept as the typical knowledge workers. So that is a very interesting point of view to look at. And another interesting thing I did notice in the article was that it is very important to understand the needs of the frontline workers in itself, because any technological innovation which does not help them, rather hinder their productivity or performance, may not be immediately necessary or needed for them. So it is very crucial that whoever develops or brings products to them or technological innovations to them really spends that time and effort understanding their needs in the first place. That's something very, very interesting to come out from the article, Kevin.
Well, very good. And the article talks about the need for engagement in order to spur and support innovation. Workers that feel recognized and that are engaged are almost 3 times more likely to exhibit high levels of engagement at work. Morgan, how can digital transformation leaders keep their employees engaged during the transition?
I think there are two big things that we have to keep in mind from the leadership perspective. And the first one is, the article mentions this specifically, from my own personal experience, I'm 46 and I haven't done anything that requires manual labor since probably the Clinton administration. So that's that's something right there. We're removed from that level, that layer. And there's another lower subheading in the article, and I'd like to kind of spin this around because they were talking about something different there. But the subheading was, why should we care? And it's talking about the leadership perspective, but really you've got to ask that question from the perspective of the worker. If you're dealing with somebody who's a front, and somebody comes to you from the digital side and says, we have a new piece of engagement software, we have new productivity software, we have a new point of sale system, whatever it may be in that particular line of business. What is it that you're going to do to make it seem a little more palatable to them and to make sure that they are actually engaged? You can't manufacture engagement. You have to approach people from where they sit. And realistically, you have to explain the practical upside. Side note, I was having a recent discussion with a colleague who works in an industry where they had just rolled out biometrics, but it was terribly rolled out. There was no communication. There was very little except for, basically, hey, we're doing this, get used to it, whatever. And no explanation as to the benefit. And if you can't explain the benefit, then why would a frontline worker care? Why, they're going to look at it and say, that's great, but why? What's in it for us? What's the advantage here? So keep that in mind.
Brian, do you agree with Morgan's perception on this? And how does that work with when teams are virtual? And many of these workers are deskless workers, yet they play crucial roles in industries like manufacturing and healthcare, hospitality, retail. So, Brian, how should leaders today address this need for engagement? And what is the impact of this further level of virtuality that teams are often working in remote work now? And how should leaders overcome that?
Yeah, excuse me. Yeah, I totally agree with Morgan. The best way to position your transformation strategy is to include as many of those frontline workers as you can. Right, you're building strategy at the C level and the senior ELT level and so forth. But if you're not including the ones that are going to continue to use and benefit from this technology and innovation, it's going to fall away. Right, you need adoption, you need buy-in, and all those things that Morgan talked about. Why is it important to me to use this? What am I getting out of it? Those benefits are only going to be seen by the customer or the customer's customer, and depending on your environment, And we all know that loyalty drives retention, drives increased wallet share across the ecosystems that we work in. So yeah, I'm totally on board with that. And I think something else that even Sunil talked about that I think is very important is the culture, right? Right from the day that you're hiring, you're recruiting, using tools and technology at that stage, introducing to these frontline workers and anybody else that's joining your organization, demonstrating your technology, the ability to use the metaverse and other AI-driven tools shows the prospect that you're ready. And this is what your culture is going to look like. So embracing it right from the time they fill out that application, and then driving that through to showing them that they care, they matter within your organization when you're driving transformation, including them in those Lean Six Sigma events or whatever transformation methodology you're using to drive that change. Change is constant, and it's how you adapt to that change.
All right, very good. The article is Keeping Frontline Workers in the Forefront When It Comes to Innovation. There is a link in the attendee chat. So everyone, please feel free to jump over there and check that article out for more. So, gentlemen, this is a great setup to our first discussion point today, talking about motivating employees to engage with productivity enhancing technology and tools. There are a lot of them, and they can upset my everyday work life. I'm the sort of person that likes a routine. I park in the same parking spot every day, and I like the same tools. I don't mind when my tools get a little bit outdated because that's where I work and that's what I'm comfortable with. And I don't like things that upset my comfort zone. What are some common mistakes that technologists make that can alienate employees, and how can we avoid those mistakes? Morgan, what are some mistakes that we make that we should be avoiding?
One of the biggest ones is lack of communication. I reference that, and both Brian and Sunil touched on it too. If you can't explain the practical benefit and explain it, I'm not going to say quickly, but I would say simply, then it's sort of the eyes are going to instantly glaze over, no matter who your audience is, whether it's an internal or it's an external customer. What is the upshot of this? And I think that kind of rolls secondarily into one of the more pervasive ones that a lot of people don't even realize, which is our own blind spots and biases. And I've certainly worked with, and I'm sure everybody can relate to this, excuse me, a manager or 12 that has a certain bias towards this tool, this stack, whatever it may be. And so instantly it's got to be, they have to revamp things their way. Hey, that's great, but I only want to use Google Suite. I only want to use this. I only want to use that. And not to pick on any particular tool, but you do have to have a certain attitude, especially in leadership, of sort of platform and software agnosticism, for lack of a better term. Mm-hmm. So you've got to be willing to embrace, whatever comes. And if you've got something embedded, it's not necessarily a bad idea to overhaul or to revamp something, but make sure that the benefits of that revamp outweigh the cost, not just the physical cost, not just the CapEx or the OpEx, but also just the training, the adjusting, all of the little details, getting that buy-in. If you don't get that, then there's very little point in doing it.
Well, Morgan makes a great point here. If I know that my boss or someone's got, a favorite tool that they want to use, and that's why we're going down this road, it's not because we really thought about it, it's because it's their favorite. I'm going to resist that change just because, people resist change. Brian, what are some ways that we can avoid that sort of favoritism, and how can we engage frontline workers in that sort of decision-making process about the tools that we will be bringing on board?
Morgan makes a great point, right? You have to have that buy-in. He's talked about it right from the very beginning. And so to get people on board and to remove those biases, you have to show them the benefits, right? You have to tell them why, being agnostic and having a scalable outcome to whatever tools and technology you're deploying. You can't be siloed. You can't be, tech stack driven. You have to be thinking outside the box in terms of your future, right? A lot of the roadmaps that we're looking at today are 2 and 3 years out, and some of these players that we're using today in terms of tools and technology may not be around, or maybe gobbled up by some of the other bigger players. So you have to always be cognizant of what's out there in the market, but you also have to look at the pros and cons, the benefits around that, and then again in employing the folks that embrace the change. In the world that I live in, we actually offer upsell, cross sell training for our frontline folks, and a career path to get into a technology from a frontline perspective. So we don't only allow them to be a part of the project. We also allow them to make a career change if that's something they're motivated to and qualified for. We pull them right out of the front line and make them part of the solution and drive that change.
Now, Sunil, we have a comment here from William. William is saying it doesn't matter what is decided in the boardroom if you can't sell it in the break room. I really like that. And Sunil, I think a lot of that, a lot of the heavy lifting when it comes to change management sort of does happen in the hallways and the break rooms of organizations, not necessarily in senior leadership meetings or with directives. Sunil, what are some tactics that you've seen successful that are a bit more pedestrian, if you will, in terms of selling it in the break room, if you will, and how can we use them too?
Absolutely. Kevin, I think I like the choice of words which William has used here to kind of explain the two different views of looking at the same change. I think what is very, very crucial to understand, and I think I understand Morgan probably touched based on it, is to communicate the why very, very clearly and very, very openly to everyone who is involved with that change. Because as you mentioned, Kevin, as human beings, we have a tendency for liking for the status quo. We like routine. We don't like to change things unless there is a very specific reason and there is a very clearly called out reason told to us. So communicating that why is very, very important. I do remember you mentioning about the change part of it, right? To me, I think bringing any significant technological tool into action, it really boils down to two words in my mind. One is culture and the other is change. Culture is really to ensure that the human behavior is attuned to adapt to the new reality of the world, and any change that is being made at this scale in any organization, big and small, I think it's very important that it is approached in a very, very methodical way. To quote a very, very specific example, I must mention about ChatGPT as a tool, right? When in January 2023 this was launched, this quickly became the fastest consumer application ever to reach 100 million users, whereas something like Netflix took about 3.5 years to get its first 100 million users. ChatGPT got in terms of weeks, if not days, right? So it's really about understanding that what is the need of the particular user of that application, and then understanding how it is to be rolled out in a very systematic manner. Because as William mentioned rightfully in his words, is that the impact of the change will only come out when the clear gap is understood by the people who are sitting in the boardrooms as well. And for that to happen, they need to understand the specific needs of the individuals on the ground, on the front line, and then adapt to the change accordingly. So I think that is where it really revolves, Kevin, I would say.
All right, very good. Well, this leads us really to our next discussion point. Engagement really has a lot to do with training and familiarity. If I'm unfamiliar with the tool and I'm not well trained on the tool, it's less likely that I'm going to use it. I'm going to find a way around it. I'm going to do it my old way and patch things up. So it's important to deploy the right resources and training to upskill colleagues and our workforce as part of our digital transformation plan. So my first question is, today for leaders and team leaders, what kind of training is really needed? And what sort of resources should I bring to that? Sunil, what kind of training is needed for employees to keep my workforce ahead of the curve today?
Absolutely. And I think if we look at the long-term success of any change, like bringing in any technological innovation or new tool and as such, I would really classify the training into two parts, Kevin. One is the systematic and the theoretical training of understanding the tool and the right rightful application of the tool, which is definitely needed at the initial stages of adoption of a new tool. But to me, the second part, which is more important than the first part, is really the hands-on training, when the person or the employee or the frontline worker actually starts to use the tool, because only then he or she would understand what the tool is really about. So the second part of the training, the hands-on training, is very, very crucial in my mind. And this is where the leaders who are kind of deploying this change of the new tool or the new technology per se should understand there should be a mechanism for the users to gradually adapt to the tool over a period of time, and there should be a forum wherein they can come back and get assistance on. So it could be any kind of support system that they use, or any kind of guidance or buddy system that they use, that the users who are slightly more advanced or slightly more trained in these tools, they'll be able to go and coach or guide the new members. So that kind of a feedback loop will basically help the new users to adapt to the tools over a period of time. It has to be spread across over a period of time in phased manner for it to be effective and sticky, I would say.
Yeah, it's interesting, Sunil. I mean, when we hear about digital transformation failure rates, and which we've covered on this show here in recent weeks, 70%, 80% failure rate, often it is adoption and training that are pointed to as the major reasons for digital transformation failure. So what Sunil is saying here is that it's important to make that part of our digital transformation plan from the beginning, yet it seems to be overlooked. Brian, is that your experience as well? Do organizations overlook this training piece? And if so, why?
I think it's because, they become a little bit siloed in their approach, and it needs to be more adaptive. You need to look at your community that needs to be trained, that needs to be upskilled, and train them in the manner that they're going to accept and adapt the best. So, we don't all learn the same way, right? So if you think about this going back to your college or your high school days, some people need to rewrite things to really digest it. Some people are visual learners. And so making that adaptive program for rollout and change, upskill, cross selling, and all of the other elements of training that are important, you need to try to meet them somewhere along their comfort zone, and then tie that back into some other HR system that recognizes when they've achieved the training, and keep them going with additional training and milestones and certificates and so forth. It does, when you include them, the more you include them, the more success you have. And if I go back to your last session on why it fails, these are some of the key points that came out of that.
Now, Morgan, how much is this going to cost me? I guess that's maybe a consideration in my plans. You're a chief information officer. How much is this going to cost, and what kind of resources am I really going to need? Is this something that I can do internally with my own people, or do I need to bring in outside trainers and consultants to get the job done? And if so, how do I plan for that?
I suppose this is the moment where the 80s movie villain goes, "How much you got?" But in all seriousness, I want to branch off something that Sunil and Brian both talked about,
Please.
but I want to go a little more specific on it. One of the things that I have had a practice of doing with any new platform rollout, whether it's something we're developing in-house, whether it's something that we've purchased out of box and we're just customizing it, whatever it may be, is to give kind of a very long lead up, right? It's almost that we're giving trailers and we're giving previews of it as we go along. So typically, what I or what others have in my vertical have done is we'll do some town halls periodically, right? We'll do some team discussions, and we'll talk a little bit about some things that are coming up down the way. Hey, we're gonna do some adoption. We're gonna add some tools into Salesforce or the Microsoft stack or whatever it is specifically, and these are what they're gonna do, and here's what you're gonna see out of it. And just give them that little bit of a appetite whet, if you will, just to kind of get their mind thinking about that. Oh, hey, that's coming down. That's going to be cool. I'm interested in that. I'm ready for that, right? It gets the brain turning. And then the biggest thing that I've seen that is key, and Sunil mentioned this, but I'm going to go even more specific on it, is when you're doing testing, specifically, you're going to get to a point after you've done a lot of your QA and your, whatever particular format you follow, whether it's black box, regression testing, whatever it may be, that you're going to want to start to bring in some users, and you're going to want to start to do true user acceptance testing even after that. And the idea here is we want to see what the actual user is going to do, obviously, how they're going to use this on a daily, how they're going to go through this workflow for whatever their particular job function is. But what you want to do is, usually you pick some more adept users. A lot of times they're team leads, they're actively engaged, they're, the whatever call team, appointment setting supervisor, whatever it may be, right? And you bring them in, you explain to them what it is that you're working on, what it is you're doing, and you give them a lot more training than you would normally. And the upshot of that is that not only are you getting real-time feedback, which is your main intention here, right? They're going to come back and say, I love this, but I hate this particular piece about the flow. It's a little clunky. Is there a way to automate this field over to here? Is there a way to do this? Is there a way to do that? But they're also going to act as your advocates. And one of the best things you can have as an advocate, people know, because I can come in and say, all right, here's my proclamation. Everybody is going to follow this proclamation. And it sounds very in the wrong context and from the wrong mindset. If somebody doesn't know me, it can sound almost like a dictator's edict, or it can sound bossy, or insert whatever notion you want here. But when you have somebody, when you have Renee, who's the supervisor for the maintenance team for the construction guys that go out and fix the houses, or whatever piece it is you're working on. I'm just picking up random from one of my past roles. They learn that system, they embrace it, and they go, oh, wow, this is so cool. As I'm picking this up, I'm seeing all the advantages here. I'm going to act as not only that advocate, but I'm also going to be sort of built-in unofficial tech support. So when somebody says, hey, I'm having trouble, blah, blah, blah. Oh, well, it's right here. Here, there's a hotkey. If you press, blah, 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 and it'll bring it right up for you. Or you can go through the menu progression and whatever. Oh, that's great. They've already got that relationship established. Somebody's advocating, somebody's showing them around, somebody's meeting them where they are in real time from their job role, understanding their job role intimately because they've probably done that job, or at the very least, they've been involved in that job from at least a same vertical standpoint. And that is invaluable.
Hey, Kevin, I just want to add a couple of things.
Please.
Sorry.
Please.
Sorry, Morgan.
No, absolutely, gentlemen.
Morgan
Jump in anytime.
What Morgan talks about here is literally, the anticipation, right? It's like that blockbuster movie that's coming out and everybody wants to see it. And if you can build up that anticipation of change and what's coming, what's new, what's exciting. However, though, I think all three of us here on the panel will agree that we don't always have that luxury, right? The time is always against us, and it becomes more of a race to get it in before the technology becomes, either obsolete or irrelevant to what we're trying to work with. Look at ChatGPT, for example, how fast that came in. It was embraced, and then many countries and industries and areas within government have banned it and whatnot. So time is never usually on our side, but when it is, Morgan's approach is spot on in my opinion.
William again is commenting with, I think, sums up our discussion here in the last few minutes in a great way. William is talking about inclusion is critical. Change is never warmly embraced unless it was your idea, which I think is spot on. And including users early gives them a sense of ownership. I think this is where I was getting at with having them be part of the selection process to begin with. And it's always helpful, as Morgan has mentioned, to find and nurture an advocate from the user community and let them communicate with peers. I think this is a way to have people engaged and feel a part of the future. A part of the future. Sunil, have you seen any? Can you give us an example of when you feel this approach has been helpful for you and your work at MasterCard?
Absolutely, Kevin. I think I could quote a specific example in this case. I think when we try to solve for any consumer specific pain points, I think what we try to employ is what is called as a design thinking led approach, which is where the basic premise of any design thinking approach really starts with empathizing with the actual user. Instead of we as the producer of the tool or the software product be visualizing and extrapolating on the specific mindset and the needs of the user, it is very important that we start empathizing with the user itself. And the design thinking process really starts with that. Once we empathize with the user, that is where we are able to accurately define what exactly is the problem statement that the tool needs to solve for. Unless that is clearly called out, we will eventually start building up a tool which is very fancy, very productive on paper, but when the rubber hits the road and when the actual user starts to use it, this is where the gap really comes out. And this is where another very interesting step that we tend to use in these kind of engagements or programs is try to ideate quickly and oftentimes fail faster than otherwise, and build a prototype which really kind of solve for the specific pain point of the user. Many a times, as it goes in the software product world, building a product which is maybe driven through a longish waterfall kind of a methodology will give you a product which looks very good on paper. While the time it takes to really build that product and when it actually goes into the hands of the user, that is where, as what Morgan probably mentioned, and also Brian kind of alluded to that, is that the pace of technology is really immense. By the time the industry is able to adapt to that pace, we already have a technology which has kind of disrupted the entire market and the entire industry in itself, right? So it becomes even more important. So often during the programs, the work that we deliver at MasterCard and the team that I lead, they work on, the intent is to create that prototype as early as possible and give it out in the hands of the user to really get the real first-hand feedback from them. I remember Morgan mentioning about the testing part of it. I think the understanding is the sooner we get the actual user acceptance testing, UAT as it is typically called, that is where the real feedback comes into place. And that's why taking the prototype to the market out to the users is very crucial. So back to the point I was making there, Kevin, I think leading all of this conceptualization of the pain points and then solving for the pain points, if there is more inclusion of the design thinking led approach, I would assume most of the tools will eventually solve more pain points for the users than otherwise, I would say.
All right, we are here today with Sunil Patil from MasterCard, Morgan Reed from Birdiescope, and Brian Phillips from TELUS International. We're here talking about preparing your workforce for coming productivity innovations. And if you have a question or comment for our guests along the way, now would be the time to pop it into the chat feature. We will be having a few moments here at the conclusion of our discussion for your questions and comments, and I will attempt to get them into the flow of the show as well. All right, gentlemen, let's move to our third discussion point today, and that is the idea of IT and HR collaboration, leading IT and HR collaboration to holistically shape the employee journey. Often there is a gap between technology, people, and the business needs of the organization. So my question to you folks is, why is tighter collaboration between IT and HR needed in the first place? And what are some methods that we can use to bridge that gap? Morgan, what are your thoughts?
There's the human element, and then there's the technology element. And from the human side, obviously, it's just, again, making sure that IT doesn't live in a silo, that HR likewise doesn't do the same. We need some clear communication, and we need a clear path where both are getting what they need out of each other. From the compliance side, the bigger issue tends to be that HR is oftentimes sort of pushing that theoretical boulder uphill in terms of trying to keep track of and keep properly sort of ahead of every regulation that they have to document retention, confidentiality, etc. And if there's anything that is constantly on their mind right now that's also on IT's mind, it's basically security of data. Cyber attacks right now are just through the roof and are only going to get more common and more intense. I see reports every single day about another organization that's been breached, and it's usually HR records that are gone after, because those are the most lucrative. That's where you've got that sort of treasure trove of data, SOC numbers and whatever it may be that's going to allow somebody to commit some identity theft or whatever nefarious action. So just being able to not just coexist peacefully, but also meet each other's needs, I think is really kind of where we live right now.
Now, Brian, what's your take on this unification of IT and HR? What are some ways that we can, as digital transformation leaders, help bridge that gap culturally within our organization?
I think I talked about it a little bit earlier, but I mean, we have to meet them where they're comfortable, right? In a lot of cases, and so whether it's if they like to play in that manual type process to get the application started, or if they're a handwritten person in terms of how they digest information, give them some flavor of that. I'm not saying you have to reinvent the wheel and make things back to where we were 25 years ago, but if you're playing in that space from an HR perspective, there are tools and technologies that IT can use to help collaborate with HR to make the onboarding, to make the learning journey, to make that career path make sense to all levels, whether you're a millennial or Gen Z or baby boomer, right? So I think what's important to understand here is you got to know your employees. You got to know what your appetite is within that environment for supporting those folks. Your number one asset is your people. Morgan talked about it right from the very beginning when you introduced this topic. If you can care for them, they will care for you.
Now, Sunil, I have a question coming in here from Boris that I'm hoping you can help me with. Boris is asking, how do you tailor motivation techniques for different generations within the workforce, considering the varying preferences and expectations of people like baby boomers or millennials or Gen Z? Sunil, what is your experience with these different generations and how we might approach them slightly differently?
Absolutely, Kevin. And I really like this question asked by Boris here for a reason, that this is the reality of the workforce that we're kind of working with these days. We have people spread across generations, and all of them have gotten their first experience of technology in a very, very different form, right? If I look back at few decades of when the software products or the technologies or the tools were being launched, their usage was limited to probably the quote unquote the most educated ones, let's just say. And probably the usage of those tools was probably for a few minutes or a few hours in the day at max. But now when we look at it more from an organization perspective and also from a general public life perspective, we probably are spending most of our time in our day either fixed through a gadget, maybe we are using a gadget, or maybe we are exposed to certain kind of digital appliance, digital tool. So it has become ubiquitous in that sense that these tools and the technology is an integral part of our lives. And given the fact that people from these varying generations, they have been exposed to these tools, to the technology in varying formats, what we as leaders need to do is first understand the differences of how these people from different generations are looking at technology. Not all of them are as adept as everybody else, so there is a varying degree of that. So as leaders, what is very, very crucial is to understand the gap and then make very specific, what also Morgan mentioned in one of his previous replies, very specific laid out plan on approaching the segments of the audience. Let's call it like that. And that is how, when we understand the gap and create a very specific actionable plan to fix the gap, which is equally important for all of these segments, that is when the overall success of such kind of a transformation will really be effective. So I think this question is really making us think hard and fast, that we need to be very conscious about the various segments of the audience profile and not the whole group as one and particular entity.
All right, very good. Well, it seems to me when we're talking about the unification of IT and HR, it might be beneficial to really look at where the synergies overlap. If I'm in HR, I want to make sure that I get the right kind of people on board. And that might mean selecting people that are adept to change and will be willing to make those adopt new technologies and have a proclivity for not resisting change. If I'm in IT, I may want to look at how my systems can attract the right kinds of talent. Do we have the most modern tools available to attract the right kinds of talent and keep the right kinds of talent? So it's really a synergistic relationship that I think perhaps in the past we haven't looked at from that point of view. Gentlemen, do you agree with that? And I'll leave it up to all of you to jump in. And if so, what are some tips that you might suggest to do just that? Anyone?
Absolutely agree. I think that one of the biggest things that you have to consider is where people's comfort lies from the technology side. Is I can't remember who it was who, I think actually both Sunil and Brian mentioned this, but also from just a implementation and maintenance and cooperation perspective, all kind of looking at that as a triangle that you would try to unify. What's going to be that sort of sweet spot in terms of platforms or tools or technology where I'm going to be comfortable from a technology and a security side, but it's also going to be something that somebody will embrace using. They won't dread, they won't turn around and every time they open it go, oh, this stupid thing, trash talk it and whatever, and get annoyed with it and thus get more disconnected from their job. And I need to measure that feedback. I need to go back and forth with the people that are actually doing the job. Again, if I can get some temperature and I can get some buy-in there, my life's easier.
All right, we are here today with Morgan Reed from BirdieScope, Brian Phillips from TELUS International, and Sunil Patil from MasterCard. Gentlemen, we have reached the action item round of the show. I'm wondering if each of you could provide us with one quick action item that our viewers can use to take advantage of the ideas and advice today. Sunil, do you have an action item for us today?
Absolutely. I think what I'm looking at, Kevin, through this conversation today, it is a good reminder for myself and for all of us, is that technology change is inevitable. And the technology change is not in the future, it's here already in the present. We're actually experiencing that change every single day. So it is very important to keep that perspective of keeping our eyes open and keeping our mindset open for understanding these changes and adapting to these changes. So one quick thought I would want to give all of us to take back with us is keeping our eyes open and keeping our mindset open.
All right, very good. Thank you, Sunil. Morgan, do you have a action item for us today?
I would say, bridging off of what we've talked about here, cooperation and establishing really open communication and relationships with teams. I think that idea of creating a relationship, nurturing it, it allows you to approach a person from where they're at. And whether we're talking about, as we mentioned earlier, the generation that person might be in, we're talking about their personality archetype, their job role, whatever it may be, as long as we can actually form that relationship and see things from their perspective, I think that we have a clear path. So I guess I would say actually relationship and perspective would be the two things.
All right. Thank you, Morgan. All right. And Brian, how about one quick action item that our viewers can use to take action on the ideas and advice today?
I think I have to go back to culture, right? I think we all talked about it in different ways, but if you create the right culture that will provide an engaged employee, whether it's frontline, whether it's senior leader, they will deliver and they will be passionate about the change and the direction that you want to go. So, technology is great. Technology, if it's used to enable the human and keep that as a mindset when you're thinking about transformation, I think you'll find you'll be successful sooner rather than later.
All right, very good. That is Sunil Patil, Morgan Reed, and Brian Phillips. Thank you, gentlemen, for a great discussion today. Your ideas and perspectives were spot on, so thank you so much. I hope that we get a chance to talk again soon. And to everyone joining us today, thank you too. We want to thank William Johnson for his excellent questions today. You have won a Digital Transformation Talk coffee mug, so stand by for more on that. William, thank you, and everyone else for your contributions today. Join us next time on February 6th at 1600 GMT when I'll be back with a great panel of guests. Next time talking about making the customer journey the focal point of your digital transformation roadmap. It should be another great discussion. And if you'd like to find me, you can do so on LinkedIn. I'm happy to connect there. Please check me out. I'm Kevin Crane, and check out my weekly audio podcast, the Digital Transformation Podcast. But for now, that will do it for this episode of Digital Transformation Talk. And until next time, I am Kevin Crane. Thank you for watching.